When my wife started seeing another man, I was ready to just file for divorce and move on. But then I found out her lover wasn't just sleeping with her, he was scamming her. And the worst part? My fool of a wife blew $64,000 of our savings, believing his get-rich-quick promises. Once I discovered that, I knew I had to teach them both a lesson. And what better way than a fake FBI raid to put them in their place? Let me tell you how it all started, because every detail of this story is important. My name is Martin, and if you'd asked me a year ago, I would say my life has been quiet and predictable. I'm an actor, not the Hollywood type, mind you, but I make a good living with my friends and colleagues. We have a small production company making short films, commercials, and even some local theater shows. Sometimes we score big, and I've been fortunate enough to tuck away some of those larger fees into a savings account that Sarah, my wife, and I share. It wasn't always easy, but for a while, everything worked out. Sarah had a great job too. She worked in marketing, had a solid income, and loved what she did. But then, life took a sharp turn. A few years back, she fell into a deep depression. It was like watching the woman I loved disappear, and no matter how much I tried to help, I couldn't pull her out of it. She ended up losing her job, and that only made things worse. I loved her. I supported her through those dark times, shouldered the burden when she couldn't, and reassured her that things would get better. But I trusted her too much. We had a plan for our future, money set aside, enough to invest wisely and eventually live more comfortably. That was always the goal. But instead of rebuilding herself, Sarah found something else to pour herself into: cryptocurrency. Now, I didn't know much about it at the time, and frankly, I didn't care to. It seemed like gambling with ones and zeros to me. But Sarah became obsessed. She started listening to these so-called experts online, attending workshops, and telling me this was the way to make us rich. She stopped talking about going back to work, about finding herself again. It was all about striking gold with some digital coin. And I, trying to be supportive, didn't stop her, even though everything inside me screamed that this wasn't right. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that her newfound passion for crypto would lead her straight into the arms of someone else. Some guy, 28 years old, she met at one of those courses. And that, as I would soon learn, was just the beginning of my nightmare. His name was Brian. The first time Sarah mentioned him, she talked about him like he was some sort of genius. A cryptocurrency was who had struck it rich young. She met him at one of those finance events, and he apparently dazzled everyone with his smooth talk about markets, blockchain, and digital gold. She came home that night excited, more animated than I'd seen her in months, and I was just glad to see her alive again. The weight of her depression seemed to lift, and for the first time in a long time, she had something to focus on. At the time, I didn't see Brian as a threat. He was just some young crypto hotshot that Sarah looked up to, someone who gave her hope. I thought maybe this was what she needed, a new passion to lift her spirits. I was wrapped up in work, deep into my own projects, and the truth was, I didn't mind her newfound enthusiasm. The argument stopped, and the tension between us eased. It felt like things were getting back on track, at least on the surface. The only thing I refused her was the one thing that really mattered in the end. I didn't let her dip into our joint account for her investments. She had begged me a few times, painting it as a surefire way to make our future brighter, but I wasn't comfortable risking the bulk of what I'd worked for on something so volatile. And to my surprise, she didn't fight me on it. She accepted my refusal with a shrug almost too easily, and I mistook that for understanding. I figured she'd use her personal savings if she really wanted to gamble on crypto. I was wrong. Months passed, and I barely noticed the changes in Sarah. I was buried in work, constantly busy with filming, editing, meetings, and travel. Meanwhile, Sarah, she bloomed. Her energy shifted. She was out more, dressing nicer, putting effort into her appearance again. And me, being the fool I was, thought she was just coming out of her depression. I assumed it was the thrill of learning something new. I should have been paying more attention. One day, one of my friends from the theater company, Mark, casually mentioned that he had seen Sarah. "Hey, man, saw your wife the other night. She looked great. I didn't know you two were into fancy dining these days." I blinked. "What do you mean?" I asked. "We've been so busy, I can't even remember the last time we went out." Mark looked surprised. "Really?" "Well, she was at Santiago's, that upscale place downtown with some guy. I just assumed it was work-related or something." Santiago's. That place wasn't exactly casual. It was where people went to impress others. The fact that she was there with someone else didn't sit right with me. But I didn't jump to conclusions, not yet. Instead, I did what any suspicious husband would do. I started watching her closely. For a week, I carefully observed Sarah. I didn't confront her, didn't let her know anything was wrong. Instead, I found excuses to work from home, cut back on meetings, and took note of her schedule. She was always going out for meetings, grabbing lunch with friends, or attending another cryptocurrency workshop. But every time she left, something gnawed at me. I followed her one evening. She said she had a late dinner with her crypto group. I watched her get dressed, heels, makeup, a red dress I hadn't seen her wear in years. It was too much for just a casual dinner. I trailed her to the restaurant, parking a few blocks away, and waited. Sure enough, Brian was there, all smiles and charm as they sat down to eat. But it wasn't just business. The way they leaned in close, the way his hand brushed hers, it was clear. This wasn't some professional meeting. The next morning, I searched her purse. I know I shouldn't have, but I needed proof. There, tucked between her wallet and lipstick, was a half-empty box of condoms. A cold, hollow feeling hit my chest like a hammer. I wasn't even angry at first, just numb. A few were missing from the pack. All the signs I'd ignored, all the excuses I'd believed, suddenly made sense. She was cheating on me. I should have stormed out right then, should have thrown her out and gotten it over with. But instead, I played it cool. I didn't want a scene, didn't want a messy divorce. I figured I could quietly put together the paperwork, get my lawyer involved, and end things without a fight. After all, I didn't want to humiliate myself more than I already had. But before I could file for divorce, I had to check one more thing, the bank account. I don't know what possessed me to do it. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was sheer paranoia. But when I logged in and saw the balance, my heart nearly stopped. $6,000. That's all that was left. Our joint account, where I had stashed over $70,000 of hard-earned money, was drained. My hands shook as I scrolled through the transactions. There it was, months of withdrawals, all leading back to Sarah. I had been working tirelessly, trusting her with our future, and she had thrown it all away. I went from heartbroken to furious in an instant. Cheating on me was one thing, but this, wiping out our savings, our future, I wasn't going to let her get away with this. A divorce wasn't enough. If I let this slide, that money would be gone forever, and she would waltz off with Brian into their crypto fantasy. No, I decided then and there that I would fight back. Peaceful wasn't an option anymore. I wasn't just dealing with a broken heart, I was dealing with betrayal on a level I never imagined possible. I reached out to a few of my friends who were into cryptocurrency. These guys knew the scene, had their ear to the ground on who was legit and who was a fraud. I asked them if they could dig up anything on Brian, this crypto expert my wife had fallen for. While I waited for them to get back to me, I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked Sarah's phone. As she was about to go out to the store, I sneakily took my phone out of her purse. My hands shook a little as I pulled it out, but I had to know. The password was easy, her birthday. I unlocked it and braced myself for what I might find. It didn't take long to discover everything. Messages, photos, voice notes, they were all there. Sarah hadn't even bothered to delete most of it. As I scrolled through their conversations, my stomach churned. It wasn't just the fact that they were meeting up for intimate encounters, though that was bad enough. It was worse. Brian was stringing her along, manipulating her into giving him money for his big crypto projects. He'd sent her these long, ridiculous messages about how she was going to get rich, how they would be free, and how it was all about to pay off. She was eating it up. In one thread, Sarah even mentioned that they could use our house for one of their little rendezvous. The thought of him setting foot in my home made me sick, but when I saw the date, I nearly lost it. They planned to meet up here while I was supposed to be out of town for a film shoot. A cozy little weekend for two in my house, in my bed. I clenched my fists. That was it. I was done being the passive husband. They thought they were going to use me as a cover? I'd give them a surprise they wouldn't forget. At first, I just wanted to catch them in the act. I figured I'd install hidden cameras in the house, gather the footage, and confront Sarah when the time was right. But then my friends got back to me with what they had found on Brian. Turns out, he wasn't just some random guy playing with cryptocurrency. He was a scam artist, well known in certain circles for pulling people into shady crypto schemes and leaving them broke. He promised them wealth and freedom, only to disappear when things went south. The reason he was still walking around, free to ruin more lives, was because most of the people he scammed went involuntarily. They threw their money at him, hoping to strike it rich. By the time they realized they'd been taken for a ride, it was too late, and legally, there wasn't much they could do. Sarah had fallen right into his trap. She wasn't just cheating on me, she was being cheated herself. And, through her stupidity, she had put our money at risk. That's when my plan shifted. A simple confrontation wasn't enough. I wasn't going to just catch them in the act, I was going to punish them. I canceled my business trip and called my closest friends, the actors in my production group. I told them what was going on, and as soon as they heard the story, they were in. We had a ton of props from past shoots, fake FBI jackets, badges, even realistic-looking weapons. If Brian liked to play the game of deception, well, I could play too. I was going to make sure they both paid for their little game. I spent the next few days preparing. I installed cameras in every room they might enter, making sure every angle was covered. I even set up microphones to capture the sound. But the cameras weren't the main event. They were just for me, a little extra proof. The real plan was what would happen when Brian and Sarah thought they were safe in my house, thinking I was miles away. On the night they planned to meet, my friends and I would storm the place. We'd be dressed as FBI agents, guns drawn, faces masked, acting like we were busting some massive criminal operation. Brian was a scam artist, after all, and what better way to rattle him than to make him believe he was finally caught? As for Sarah, well, she was about to learn the hard way just how stupid she'd been. I wasn't interested in a peaceful divorce anymore. I sat there in the van outside my house, surrounded by my friends, all of us dressed head to toe in fake FBI gear. My heart was racing, not from fear, but from the anticipation of what was about to unfold. It was surreal. The house I had shared with Sarah, the woman I once trusted completely, was about to become the stage for the ultimate act of betrayal and revenge. Everything was set. We had rehearsed it to perfection. Mike, the new guy in our group, was going to play the lead role, the hard-hitting investigator, the guy who would lay it on thick. He was the only one Sarah wouldn't recognize. The rest of us? We'd be masked, staying in the background, making sure the whole scene played out like something out of a crime drama. The plan was simple. Wait for Brian and Sarah to get comfortable, then storm in like a full-blown FBI raid. We'd scare the life out of them, catch them in the act, and expose Brian for the fraud he was. It was a perfect setup. I'd told Sarah that I was out of town for a film shoot, just as they had planned. She bought it completely, which made it all the easier to sit back and wait for the show to begin. We didn't have to wait long. Brian pulled up in his flashy convertible, rented, of course. He strutted out like he owned the place, all swagger and confidence. I could see the smirk on his face from where I sat, and it made my blood boil. He was playing his part to perfection, fooling my wife into believing he was some self-made crypto millionaire. But I knew better. He wasn't rich, not even close. He was a con man, living on borrowed time and other people's money. Sarah greeted him at the door with a smile that made my stomach turn. She was falling for every lie he fed her, and I was about to make sure she paid for it. They went inside, completely unaware that we were watching their every move. We waited, giving them time to settle in. Through the cameras I'd planted in the living room, I could see everything. They poured themselves wine, laughing and talking like they didn't have a care in the world. Brian was laying it on thick, talking about how great things were going, telling Sarah she was about to be a rich woman and could send me away once they hit it big. Sarah hung on his every word, nodding along, her eyes wide with excitement. She actually believed him. She thought this low-life con man was going to make her rich, that she was going to live some fantasy life with him while I faded into the background. It was painful to watch, but I needed to see it. I needed the full picture of just how deep her betrayal went. Then came the part that really twisted the knife. Brian, in his smooth-talking way, started telling Sarah he loved her. He looked her right in the eyes, spewing nonsense about how they were meant to be together, how this was their chance at a new life. And she believed him. She actually believed that because they were sleeping together, he couldn't possibly be lying to her. It was disgusting. I clenched my fists, my blood boiling, but I waited. They started hugging, kissing, and then things escalated. Clothes began to come off. First his shirt, then hers, and before I knew it, they were practically naked, moving toward the sofa in the living room. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I gave the signal. "It's time," I said, my voice tight with anger. Mike, along with the rest of us, snapped into action. We threw open the van doors and stormed across the lawn toward the house. My heart pounded in my chest, but I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was it. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. It's going to be a powerful show, so don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We kicked in the front door, yelling, "FBI. Don't move." Brian and Sarah froze, their faces a mix of shock and terror. Brian had only managed to pull up his underwear, and Sarah grabbed for a throw blanket to cover herself. It was chaos. They were both half naked, fumbling around, trying to process what was happening. Mike, playing his role to perfection, stormed in, shouting orders. "Everyone on the floor. Face down, now," he barked, waving his fake badge and pointing his replica gun. Brian and Sarah were paralyzed with fear. They dropped to the floor, trembling, completely convinced they were caught in some kind of sting operation. Sarah's face was pale, her eyes wide with panic, and Brian, well, all the swagger he had when he arrived was gone. He was sweating, his voice shaky as he tried to stammer out an excuse. "I don't know what's going on. I swear, I haven't done anything wrong," Brian pleaded, his voice cracking as he glanced at Sarah, desperate for some kind of way out. Mike, keeping his cool, leaned in and stared down at them. "Brian Jacobs, you're under investigation for fraud and multiple counts of scamming individuals out of large sums of money. We've been tracking you for months. You think you can just keep ripping people off, making false promises? Well, today, your luck runs out." Sarah gasped, looking over at Brian in disbelief. "What is he talking about, Brian?" she asked, her voice trembling. Brian was scrambling for words, trying to keep it together. "I don't know. This has to be some kind of mistake. I'm not involved in anything illegal. Tell them, Sarah, tell them I'm legit." But the doubt had already crept into her eyes. She stared at him, her face a mixture of confusion and horror. All those promises he had made, all the lies he had fed her, it was crumbling right in front of her. And there I was, watching it all unfold, the sweet taste of justice filling the air. Mike stepped up his performance, leaning over them. "You think we don't know? You think we haven't been tracking every move you've made? You're going away for a long time. Both of you." Mike wasn't letting up. If anything, he was having way too much fun with this. He loomed over Brian and Sarah, his fake FBI badge gleaming under the light, while they lay face down on the floor, half naked and trembling. He was playing the tough guy to perfection, and I had to admit it was impressive. Even I almost believed he was a real investigator. "Brian," Mike said, his voice low and menacing, "if you don't confess to your dirty deeds right now, I swear the big guys in prison will love you every night." The color drained from Brian's face. He looked like he might faint. I was crouching behind my mask, trying not to laugh, but then it happened. Brian, shaking like a leaf, completely lost control and wet himself. There was no mistaking the dark stain spreading across his expensive pants. I had to bite my lip hard to keep from bursting into laughter. Mike, without missing a beat, looked down at Brian with fake disgust. Oh, come on, man. You didn't even make it to the interrogation room. Brian started babbling, his voice shaky as he tried to pull himself together. And no, you don't understand. This is all a misunderstanding. My investments are legit. I swear. I was just following tutorials online. He tried to sit up, but Mike slammed his hand on the table, making Brian flinch and lie back down. Tutorials, huh? Mike said, crossing his arms. I've heard some weak excuses in my time, but this takes the cake. Why don't you go ahead and explain your little operation, Mr. Crypto Guru? Brian, desperate to prove he wasn't the lowlife we all knew he was, fumbled for his phone. I can show you, okay? It's all real. I have links, screenshots, everything. He pulled up his browser and showed Mike a link to a shady-looking website. See? This is where it all happens. It's called Crypto Fortune X. It's cutting-edge blockchain technology. Mike leaned in, pretending to scrutinize the page. Crypto Fortune X, huh? And what exactly is it that you're offering people on this website? Brian, eager to show off, started talking faster. It's decentralized mining. Yeah, like Bitcoin, except better. You don't need any of those expensive rigs. You just invest through these tutorials I found on YouTube. It's all there. You just put in money in. Mike interrupted, barely able to keep a straight face. And what do people get in return? A one-way ticket to I-just-got-scam.com? No, Brian said, clearly not getting the sarcasm. They get crypto coins. Sort of. It's based on a unique system. You invest and then you wait. Wait for the market to turn or something. He was sweating now, his words all over the place, trying to remember whatever nonsense he had heard online. And then, there's a referral program. So, when people invest under me, I get a percentage of their investment. It's totally legit. I had to turn away to hide my grin. Brian was digging his own grave, and he didn't even realize it. The more he talked, the more obvious it became that he had no clue what he was doing. He threw out terms like blockchain, mining, and decentralized, but it was clear he was just parroting whatever he'd heard on YouTube. It was like watching a bad infomercial, except the guy selling the product was too dumb to even understand it. And let me get this straight, Mike said, leaning in closer. You're telling me people just voluntarily hand over their hard-earned money and you make your money off referral links? Brian nodded furiously, like a puppy desperate for approval. Yes, exactly. It's like, a community. Everyone chips in. Totally legal. Mike raised an eyebrow. Brian, that's the definition of a Ponzi scheme, you moron. Brian's face fell. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. Meanwhile, I could see the wheels turning in Sarah's head. She'd been quiet up until now, just watching as her golden boy fumbled through his pathetic explanations. But as the realization hit her, this was the man she'd thrown away our life savings for, her face drained of color. She looked at Brian like she was seeing him for the first time, her eyes wide with horror. Wait, what? You said this was all legitimate. You said we were going to make money. Brian, still clueless, turned to her with a weak grin. We are, babe. It's complicated. Markets go up and down. Sarah's panic was starting to build. She was putting the pieces together, and none of them looked good. You mean I gave you $64,000 of my husband's money for this? For a referral scheme? Mike jumped on that like a shark smelling blood. That's right, Sarah. You're not just a victim here, you're an accomplice. You funneled family money into an illegal operation. You've been scammed, sure, but you're also responsible. Care to explain yourself? Sarah burst into tears, her whole body shaking. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I thought we were going to get rich. Brian said he knew what he was doing. I just wanted to help. She sobbed, clutching the throw blanket tighter around herself, and tried to explain between the gasps and wails. I didn't do anything wrong. I just gave him the money to invest. I didn't know it was a scam. Mike, stone-faced, glanced at me, his cue to keep pressing. Ignorance isn't a defense, sweetheart. You've been a part of this from the start, and now you're in deep. I had to step out of the room for a second because if I stayed there, I was going to lose it. Brian was sweating, Sarah was sobbing, and the whole scene was so absurd that I could barely hold in my laughter. My wife had thrown her lot in with the dumbest con man on the planet, and now they were both drowning in their own stupidity. This was going better than I had planned. The revenge was sweet, and it was only just getting started. I stood in the other room, trying to figure out my next move. The whole situation was already spiraling into absurdity, and as much as I wanted to laugh at Brian crying like a baby and peeing his pants, I needed to focus on one thing, getting my money back. I had $64,000 on the line, and I wasn't going to let that moron walk away with it. I quickly texted Mike, "Come here. We need to talk." A minute later, Mike appeared, trying to suppress a grin. "Martin, what's the plan? You want to end the show now, or are we keeping the circus going?" I glanced back toward the room where Brian and Sarah were still on the floor, half-dressed and terrified. We need to trick Brian into coughing up the money. That's priority number 1. Let's separate them. Take Sarah to another room so she can't hear what we're about to do. I'm going to have a little chat with Brian. Mike's eyes lit up. Got it. Let's make him sweat a little more. He headed back into the living room, but I could hear him getting carried away before he even reached Brian. "Hey, Brian," Mike said with a booming voice, "I've been informed that there's a pack of cocaine in your car. Are you completely out of your mind?" Brian's eyes nearly popped out of his head, and I swear, he started crying like a 5-year-old who just realized Christmas was canceled. No, it's not mine. The car's not even mine. It's rented. I'm not a millionaire, I swear. I'm just a guy who watches YouTube. I'm nobody." Sarah, realizing the depth of her mistake, screamed at him, "Brian, you lied about everything? You told me you were rich. I trusted you with our money, and you're just a pathetic loser." That was the perfect opening. Mike leaned down and said, "Sarah, why don't you come with me? You can make a statement against the scumbag right now." He shot me a quick glance and winked. I nodded back, and he gently pulled Sarah to her feet and escorted her out, leaving Brian alone with me. Now it was time for the real show. I walked over to Brian, who was still shaking on the floor, and crouched down, keeping my voice low and menacing. "Listen, you little bastard. You've been deceiving people, ripping them off for large sums of money. You know what's going to happen to you in prison, right?" Brian stared up at me, his eyes wide with terror. I leaned in closer. "I'll tell you what's going to happen. When you go to prison, everyone will know that you pissed yourself when you got arrested. And there's a special role for people like you in there. Do you understand what I mean?" Brian was practically shaking out of his skin. "I am not a fraudster. I swear. I'm just advertising. Advertising new projects and cryptocurrencies. I'm not responsible if they fail. I'm just a middleman." I shook my head. "Yeah, well, here's the problem. This woman, Sarah, from whom you stole $64,000, wants her money back. That's your only way out of this mess. If you give her back the money, maybe, just maybe, you won't end up in a place where they make you their pet." Brian blinked at me, clearly not thinking straight. "I'll do it. I'll give it back. I swear." He was so scared he didn't even think to ask for a lawyer or any way out. He was buying into the whole act, hook, line, and sinker. I leaned in closer. "You're going to give her the money right now. Not tomorrow. Today." Brian gulped, starting to stammer. "But I don't have the money right now. I invested it. I swear I did." I stared at him, and that's when it hit me. This idiot wasn't just an idiot. He was a lying idiot. He didn't invest a penny of that money. He was burning through Sarah's cash, living it up, and hoping no one would catch on. Without saying a word, I snatched Brian's phone out of his hand and started scrolling through his messages. Sure enough, there it was, dozens of texts to his buddies bragging about how he'd found a stupid woman he could scam and sleep with. He was laughing at her behind her back, bragging about how easy it was to take her money while pretending to love her. I snapped a few photos of his texts on my phone, just to have something to show Sarah later. Then I looked at Brian, who was still lying on the floor, staring up at me like a puppy that had just been kicked. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. I just slowly put my boot on his balls and started applying pressure. Brian let out a high-pitched squeal that could have shattered glass. I'll give it all back. I swear. Please, stop. Please. I pressed down a little harder, just enough to make sure he understood. I don't think you get it, Brian. This isn't a negotiation. You're going to give her the money right now, or I'm going to make sure you can't walk straight for the next year. Brian's eyes widened with terror. Please, man, I swear, I'll give it back. Just give me time. I barked back at him, my patience wearing thin. Time? You think I've got time for your crap? We need the money now. He stammered, practically choking on his words. It's at my house. I swear, that's where the money is. I don't have it here. That was the moment where everything went off the rails. I hadn't planned to take the show on the road, but I was in too deep now. I needed my money back, and if that meant dragging Brian to his house in the middle of the night to get it, so be it. I turned to my friends, who were standing by, watching this disaster unfold with barely contained smirks. Get this bastard in the van, I said, grabbing Brian by the scruff of his neck and shoving him forward. Brian stumbled, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. As they hauled him toward the door, I quickly texted Mike. We're going to get the money. Keep Sarah busy. He replied almost instantly. Everything's under control. Knowing Mike, that probably meant he was making up some wild story to keep her distracted. We piled into the van, Brian wedged between us, still whimpering about how he was going to pay everything back. I couldn't help but think that this whole prank had gone too far. I was walking a fine line between a crazy revenge plot and, well, actual kidnapping. And I'm not proud to say it, but in that moment, I wasn't thinking rationally. To anyone listening, never do this. Always act according to the law. But at that moment, I was too pissed off to care. Brian lived on the other side of town, in some rented house that. It was late, and the streets were empty. Thank God, because the last thing I needed was to explain why a bunch of guys dressed like FBI agents were hauling a terrified, half-naked man out of a van. We pushed Brian into the house, and he immediately started rummaging through drawers, looking for the money. After a few tense minutes, he managed to scrape together $25,000 in cash from random hiding spots around the house. I took it and glared at him. Where's the rest? He blinked, sweating, his hands trembling. That's all I've got, man. I swear. I'll get you the rest in 6 months. Just give me time. 6 months? Yeah, right. I didn't believe him for a second. The guy was a pathological liar, and I had no doubt that as soon as we left, he'd skip town and disappear. I wasn't about to let him walk away that easily. I needed to keep the pressure on. So I decided to turn the heat up, literally. I turned to my friend Fernando and, with a straight face, said, Hey, Fernando, heat up the pan. Brian's eyes bulged out of his head. What? What are you doing? This is insane. Fernando, bless his heart, jumped right into character. He disappeared into the kitchen and, moments later, returned holding a frying pan. I could barely hold in my laughter, but Brian wasn't laughing. He was shaking like a leaf, finally starting to figure out that maybe, just maybe, we weren't the FBI. You guys aren't FBI, are you? He stammered, his voice trembling with panic. I had already decided to go all the way, so I started improvising and talking complete nonsense. I leaned in close, lowering my voice to a deadly whisper. No, Brian, we're not the FBI. We're the Mexican drug cartel. And let me tell you something, we don't mess around when it comes to getting our money back. I could see the color drain from his face. You're joking, right? I smiled, but it wasn't a friendly one. Do I look like I'm joking? You think this is a game? You think you can scam people, take their money, and walk away? You dragged a respected man from our organization into this mess. Now we have to clean it up. Fernando, ever the performer, started muttering something menacing in Spanish, waving the frying pan around for dramatic effect. Brian was practically wetting himself again, his eyes darting from me to Fernando, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. All right, he cried, his voice cracking. I'll give you more. Please, just stop. I crossed my arms and waited. Brian started searching his house again, and sure enough, after a few minutes, he found another $10,000 stashed away in some ridiculous hiding place. But that wasn't all. Desperate to save his skin, he made a phone call to one of his buddies. Look, man, I need 15 grand. Right now, no questions. An hour later, his friend showed up, nervous as hell, and handed over another $15,000 in cash. That brought the total to $50,000. Not quite the full $64,000, but at that point, I was satisfied. I knew we'd squeezed every last penny out of him. Brian, still shaking, looked up at me, his face pale. I swear, I'll get you the rest. I just need more time. I stared at him for a long moment before I nodded. You've got 1 month, Brian. If you don't come through, we'll be back. And next time, Fernando's bringing a bigger pan. Brian nodded furiously, clearly terrified. I'll get it, I swear. With the cash in hand, we left Brian in his house, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the span of a few hours. As we drove back, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and disbelief at how far this had gone. It had started as a prank, but now I was just glad to get some of the money back. As we pulled up to the house, I texted Mike again. Come out and get in the car. I instructed him to tell Sarah that we had found out all the information about Brian, that legally he was clean because she had voluntarily handed him the money. No fraud, no scam, just per judgment on her part. Mike replied with a simple on it. About 10 minutes later, he ran out of the house, shaking his head and grinning as he hopped into the car with us. She's a mess in there, he said, chuckling. Still crying, but I told her Brian was clean. She bought it. The tension broke as soon as we pulled away from the house. We headed straight to a nearby bar to blow off some steam. The actors, Mike, and I couldn't stop laughing, but there was a flicker of worry among the group. Man, Mike said between sips of his beer, this was hilarious, but it did kind of feel like we just committed a crime. The others nodded in agreement, looking at me with raised eyebrows. You sure this was a good idea, Martin? I waved it off, feeling the buzz from both the victory and the beer. Look, Brian's an idiot, and Sarah's just as stupid. They deserve what they got. Besides, it's not like Brian's gonna go to the cops. He'd have to explain why he wet himself while dressed in his underwear. And given Brian's dirty dealings, he's certainly not going to go to the police. And the other reason is my jokes about the drug cartel. You should have seen the look on his face. And Sarah? Well, let's just say she's got other problems to deal with. The night ended with us still laughing about the whole thing, but in the back of my mind, I knew this wasn't exactly the smartest move I'd ever made. The prank had gone too far, and I'd crossed a line, but it was too late to turn back now. The next day, I returned home. I walked into the living room to find Sarah sitting on the couch, an empty bottle of wine on the table and tear-streaked makeup on her face. She was a mess. She glanced up at me, her eyes bloodshot, and without saying a word, I knew the performance had worked. She was broken. Where's the money, Sarah? I asked, my voice low and cold. I wasn't going to let her off easy. I explained that I discovered money missing from our bank account. And then I got word that you were involved in a stupid financial scam. She immediately burst into tears, her sobs echoing through the room. I'm so sorry, she wailed. I didn't mean to. I thought I was doing the right thing. Brian said. He said we'd be rich, that it was all safe. I stood there, watching her fall apart, and for a moment, a part of me felt guilty. But then I remembered the text messages I'd seen, the photos, the lies, the affair. That guilt quickly turned to anger. Then I said the police called me and told me about you. They also sent me photos of your cryptoguru Brian's correspondence with his friends. Look at him bragging about sleeping with you and scamming you for money. So, Brian was your lover, huh? You were sleeping with him while throwing away our money. My voice was sharp, and she flinched like I'd slapped her. No, it wasn't like that, she stammered, desperately trying to backtrack. I didn't mean to cheat. It was a mistake. I was lost, depressed. I wasn't thinking straight. Lost? Depressed? I repeated bitterly. So you thought throwing away our savings on some scam and sleeping with a con artist was the solution? She was practically on her knees, pleading now. Please, Martin. It was a mistake. I didn't know what I was doing. I was vulnerable. Please, forgive me. We can fix this. I'll make it right. But I wasn't interested in fixing anything anymore. I had played my role as the angry husband perfectly, and now it was time to bring it to a close. Sarah, this isn't fixable, I said flatly. You betrayed me. You squandered our future. And you lied about everything. We're done. We're getting a divorce. She broke down again, sobbing, begging me to reconsider. But my mind was made up. My arguments were solid, my heart already closed off. You cheated on me. You lied to me. You wasted our money on some idiot's crypto schemes. There's nothing left to fix. Then I wanted to show her the hidden camera video, but I changed my mind. I thought that this information could already work against me. A few weeks later, we finalized the divorce. We divided the little we had left, $6,000 in the bank and some property. Sarah was a wreck, and even though I got what I wanted, it was hard not to feel like I'd lost something too. My love for her had turned into something ugly, something I never thought would happen. But I knew I couldn't trust her again. Once a line like that is crossed, there's no going back. The one thing she didn't know, and would probably never find out, was that I had squeezed $50,000 out of Brian. And as for Brian, well, after that night, he disappeared, vanished from the city, from the internet, from everywhere. He blocked Sarah on every platform, cut off all communication, and vanished into thin air like the scammer he was. In the end, I taught both of them a lesson. It wasn't exactly the lesson I'd planned, but it was something. Sarah lost me, Brian lost his dignity and most of his cash, and I walked away knowing that I had salvaged a bit of what they tried to take from me. It's funny, in a way, how love can turn into something else entirely. I used to think I'd never stop loving Sarah, but the truth is, sometimes love dies slowly, replaced by anger, and then, well, maybe that anger takes on its own life. Maybe it drives you to do things you wouldn't normally do. Would I have done things differently if I could go back? Maybe, but in the end, I got my money back. And that, at least, was something. If you enjoyed this story, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I wish everyone happiness, love, and justice.